Welcome back to the channel. Today we're doing something a little different and incredibly valuable. We're going to roleplay a full 30-minute technical interview for a very specific and interesting role. An exploitation analyst or penetration tester, specifically for someone transitioning from a senior network engineering background. This is a common career path, but it has its own unique interview challenges. The hiring manager needs to know, can you bridge your deep networking knowledge to an attacker's mindset? And do you have the consulting and communication skills to handle clients? I'll be playing the part of the interviewer, and we'll have our candidate answer the tough questions. Pay close attention to how the answers are structured. We're focusing on methodology, business impact, and clear communication. This is your complete guide to acing that interview. Let's get started.
Good morning. Thanks for coming in. We've reviewed your resume, and your extensive background in network engineering is very impressive. As you know, this role is a pivot into a client-facing penetration testing position. So let's start there. How does your deep networking knowledge give you a unique advantage as a penetration tester compared to someone who started their career purely in cybersecurity?
That's a great question. My background in network engineering gives me a home field advantage on any engagement. While many security professionals are skilled at using tools to find vulnerabilities, I can think like the architect who built the network. This gives me three key advantages. 1. Understanding normal. I have a deep intuitive understanding of what normal network traffic and configurations look like. This means I can spot anomalies, misconfigurations, and policy violations much faster. For instance, I might see an unusual routing path or a legacy protocol in use that a tool might miss, which could be a pivot point. 2. Seeing the whole picture. I don't just see a target IP address. I see the entire potential data path, the firewalls it crosses, the switches it touches, the potential for VLAN hopping, and the trust relationships between network segments. This allows me to build a more comprehensive attack plan that goes beyond simple vulnerability scanning. 3. Credibility in remediation. When I present findings, I'm not just saying, this is broken. I can explain why it's broken from a network design perspective and provide highly specific, actionable guidance that the customer's network team can immediately understand and implement. It builds trust and makes the guidance more effective.
What is the difference between a vulnerability, an exploit, and a payload?
A good way to explain it is with a simple analogy. Imagine a house. A vulnerability is an unlocked window. An exploit is the specific technique of knowing how to slide that window open from the outside. The payload is the action you take once inside, such as stealing valuables or unlocking the front door for others. For a technical breakdown, vulnerability is a weakness, flaw, or bug in a system's code, design, or implementation. An attacker can exploit this weakness to achieve something the system's designers did not intend. Examples include a lack of input validation or improper memory management. An exploit is a piece of code, a command, or a technique that leverages a specific vulnerability to gain unauthorized access, escalate privileges, or cause a denial of service. The exploit is the how. It's the tool that targets the weakness. Finally, a payload is the actual malicious code that is delivered by the exploit to the target system. The payload is the what. It's what the attacker wants to accomplish after the vulnerability has been successfully exploited. Common payloads include creating a reverse shell, installing ransomware, or adding a new user account.
That makes perfect sense. Building on that, can you walk me through your high-level methodology for planning a penetration test, from the moment you receive the statement of work to the day you start testing?
Certainly, a successful test is all about meticulous planning before you ever send a packet. My methodology follows 4 main phases. First, I thoroughly dissect the statement of work, SOW. I need to be crystal clear on the exact IP ranges, applications, and domains that are in scope. Equally important is what's of scope. I need to know what systems are off limits to prevent any disruption to the client's business. I also confirm the rules of engagement. What are the testing windows? Are there specific attack types, like DOS, that are forbidden? Who are my emergency points of contact at the client, and how do we communicate? I get all of this confirmed in writing. Before touching the client's network, I start with passive reconnaissance. I use tools like Google Dorking, Shodan, and social media to find information about their technology stack, potential employee email formats, and public documents. I'll look at job postings to see what technologies they're hiring for. If they're hiring a senior F5 engineer, I know they have F5 load balancers. This helps build a preliminary map of their external infrastructure and potential attack surface, without sending a single, active probe. Based on the OSINT and the client's industry, I develop a threat model. If they're a financial institution, I'll prioritize attacks aimed at sensitive data exfiltration. If they're a manufacturing company, I might focus more on the potential for operational technology, OT disruption. I think about the likely adversaries. Are we simulating a script kiddie, an organized crime group, or a nation-state? This dictates the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures I'll use. Finally, I prepare my testing environment. I'll configure my Kali Linux instance, ensure my tools like Burp Suite, Nmap, and Metasploit are updated, and set up my logging and reporting framework. I make sure every action I take can be documented and correlated back to the plan. By following these steps, when I start the active testing on day 1, I'm not going in blind. I have a clear plan, defined objectives, and a solid understanding of the target environment.
Excellent. A very thorough approach. Let's dive into a technical scenario. You've gained initial access to a corporate Windows environment and have credentials for a low-privileged user. You suspect there might be an opportunity for Kerberoasting. Can you walk me through what Kerberoasting is, how you would perform the attack, and what specific remediation you would recommend to the client?
Absolutely. Is an attack that targets Active Directory service accounts. These accounts often have weak, non-expiring passwords and in some cases high privileges. The goal is to crack their passwords offline to gain access to the services they manage. My process would be 1. First, for my low-privileged user context, I would query the domain controller to find accounts with a service principal name, SPN, set. These are the service accounts. I can do this using PowerShell tools built into frameworks like PowerSploit or with tools like Rubius. 2. Next, I'd request a Kerberos ticket granting service, TGS ticket for one of these SPNs. Because any authenticated user can request these tickets, this action doesn't raise alarms. The domain controller encrypts the ticket using the service account's NTLM password hash. 3. I would then extract that encrypted portion of the ticket and take it offline. Using a tool like Hashcat or John the Ripper, I can run a dictionary or brute force attack against the hash. Since these service accounts often have notoriously weak passwords like Fall 2025, it's often possible to crack them relatively quickly. The most critical step is to enforce strong, long, and complex passwords for all service accounts. I'd recommend a minimum of 25 characters, ideally moving to Group Managed Service Accounts, GMSAs, which have automatically managed 120-character, complex passwords. I would advise them to regularly audit for accounts with SPNs, especially those in privileged groups like domain admins. Implement monitoring to detect excessive TGS ticket requests from a single user, which can be an indicator of a Kerberoasting attempt in progress.
Very well explained. Let's move to a different scenario. Imagine you're leading a penetration test. On day 3, you hit a wall. Your initial footholds have been contained, and your standard tools aren't finding any new vulnerabilities on the scope targets. The client is expecting a progress update tomorrow. What is your thought process? What are your next steps, and how do you communicate this to the client?
That's a realistic scenario. My first step is to avoid panic and not just rerun the same scans. Hitting a wall means it's time to change perspective. My internal process and next steps go back to enumeration. I'd revisit all the data I've collected. Did I miss something in the Nmap scans? A non-standard port with a strange banner? Is there anything in the OSINT data, like developer comments in public code repositories, that could hint at an overlooked technology? Think about business logic. I'd shift focus from technical vulnerabilities to business logic flaws. Can I manipulate the application in a way the developers didn't intend? For example, can I add a competitor's product to a shopping cart and then change the item ID in the post request to get a discount on my own company's product? Analyze the human element. I'd review the information gathered about the organization. Is there potential for a more targeted phishing campaign, if in scope? Re-examine the network. Leveraging my network engineering background, I'd look closer at the network topology. Are there any assumed trust relationships between the scoped systems and out-of-scope systems that I could potentially abuse? Communicating with the client. Transparency without causing alarm is key. On the progress call, I would be honest, but confident. I would say something like, "So far, we've successfully tested your initial layers of defense, and your team has done a good job of containing our initial access points. This is a positive indicator of your reactive security posture. Our current focus is now shifting to a deeper analysis of the application's business logic and more complex architectural pathways. This is a normal part of a mature penetration test where initial low-hanging fruit has been secured. We will be focusing on X and Y for the remainder of the week, and will keep you updated on our progress." This approach shows them that the test is providing value even if we haven't found a critical vulnerability yet, and it manages their expectations while demonstrating a clear, methodical plan forward.
The role requires a deep understanding of adversary networks and CNO processes. How would you go beyond a standard vulnerability scan and actually simulate the tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, of a specific threat actor, for example, a ransomware group like Conti or Revel, during an engagement?
That's an excellent question, as it's a very common finding with significant impact. The risk explained, Link Local Multicast Name Resolution, LLMNR, and NetBIOS Name Service, NBTNS, are legacy name resolution protocols in Windows. They are essentially a fallback when DNS fails. If a user tries to access a network share, for instance, adding file server ZU1 and DNS can't resolve it, the computer will broadcast a message to the entire local network segment asking, "Who is file server ZU1?" The critical vulnerability here is that any machine on that local network can respond to that broadcast. This opens the door for a classic man-in-the-middle MITM attack. My exploitation process, positioning and tools, I would establish a presence on the local network segment. Using a tool like Responder, I'd put my machine's network interface into listening mode, poisoning the well. I would wait for a legitimate user to make a typo or for a DNS request to fail. When their machine broadcasts that LLMNR or NBTNS request, Responder will automatically answer, "Yes, I am file server 01, and my IP address is my attacker IP." Capturing the hash. The victim's computer, now trusting me, will attempt to authenticate to my malicious server to access the share. In doing so, it sends its NTLMv2 hash. Responder captures this hash. Offline cracking or relay. Now I have two options. I can take that captured hash offline and try to crack it using Hashcat to get the user's plaintext password. More powerfully, I can perform a relay attack using a tool like ntlmrelays.py. Instead of cracking the hash, I can relay those credentials in real time to another machine on the network, like a server with SMB signing disabled, to gain an authenticated session and execute code. Actionable guidance for the customer. My primary recommendation would be to disable LLMNR and NBTNS via group policy across their entire domain. DNS should be the single source of truth for name resolution. It's a simple change with a massive security payoff. As a compensating control, I'd advise them to enforce SMB signing on all machines, which cryptographically signs SMB packets and mitigates relay attacks.
The job description mentions experience in software engineering and programming. Let's touch on that. Can you explain, at a high level, the concept of a stack-based buffer overflow and the key components an attacker needs to control to achieve remote code execution?
That's the core of moving from vulnerability assessment to true penetration testing or red teaming. Simulating a specific adversary requires a threat intelligence-driven approach. Here's how I do it. Intelligence gathering. My first step is to research the chosen threat actor. I'd use resources like the MITRE @TNK framework, threat intelligence reports from firms like Mandiant and CrowdStrike, and government alerts. I'm looking for their specific patterns. Initial access. Do they favor phishing with specific lure themes? Or do they exploit public-facing applications like Fortinet or Exchange? Execution and persistence. What LOL bins, living off the land binaries, do they prefer? Do they use PowerShell, WMI, or scheduled tasks for persistence? Privilege escalation and lateral movement. Do they heavily rely on Kerber roasting and pass the hash? Or do they use tools like Mimikatz and Bloodhound? Command and control. C2. What C2 frameworks do they use, e.g. Cobalt Strike? What protocols do they use to blend in, like DNS over HTTPS? Developing the attack plan. Based on this intelligence, I'd build an operational plan that mirrors their TTPs. For instance, if simulating a ransomware group, my goal wouldn't be just to get domain admin. The goal would be to map out the path to ransom, identify critical data stores, exfiltrate a small proof-of-concept dataset, and then deploy a harmless simulated ransomware node to demonstrate impact. Execution with emulation. During the test, I would consciously constrain myself to the adversary's known toolset and techniques. If the group doesn't use SQL injection, I won't spend days on it. If they heavily use PowerShell Empire, I'll use that. This makes the test a realistic drill for the client's blue team. It tests whether their specific security controls and detection capabilities are tuned to stop a real-world threat, not just a generic Nessus scan. The final report then provides much more value. It won't just say, you have a vulnerability. It will say, your network is vulnerable to the exact TTPs used by ransomware group X, and here is the attack path they would likely take.
The job description mentions experience in software engineering and programming. Let's touch on that. Can you explain, at a high level, the concept of a stack-based buffer overflow and the key components an attacker needs to control to achieve remote code execution?
Certainly. A stack-based buffer overflow is a classic memory corruption vulnerability that occurs when a program tries to write more data into a buffer, a temporary storage area on the stack, than it has allocated space for. The concept: imagine the program's memory stack is like a stack of plates. When a function is called, it places its local variables, buffers, and the return address on the stack. The return address is critically important. It's the map that tells the CPU where to go back to after the function is finished. A vulnerability occurs when, for example, a program uses an unsafe function like strcpy to copy user-supplied data into a buffer without checking its length. If a user provides 500 bytes of data for a buffer that only holds 100 bytes, the extra 400 bytes will overflow and overwrite adjacent memory on the stack. Achieving code execution. To turn this crash into code execution, an attacker needs to control two things. The injected code, shellcode. The attacker crafts a small piece of malicious code, the shellcode, which could do something like open a reverse shell back to their machine. This shellcode is placed within the oversized data they send to the application. The instruction pointer, EIP. This is the most crucial step. The attacker's main goal is to overwrite the saved return address on the stack with the memory address of their own shellcode. When the vulnerable function finishes, instead of returning to its legitimate location, the CPU reads the attacker-controlled address and jumps to the shellcode, executing it with the privileges of the application. So, in summary, the attacker sends a carefully crafted payload containing their shellcode and the precise memory address of that shellcode, positioned to overwrite the function's return address. This hijacks the program's execution flow.
A huge part of this role is creating documentation and presenting it. In your opinion, what separates an average penetration test report from a truly excellent one that provides maximum value to the customer?
That's a fantastic question because the report is the tangible product of the entire engagement. 3 key things separate an average report from an excellent one. The executive summary. An excellent report begins with a 1-page executive summary written in plain business language. It avoids all technical jargon. It should clearly state the project's objectives, the overall risk posture, e.g., critical, and a summary of the key business risks discovered. An executive should be able to read only this page and understand the core problem. For example, instead of SQL injection in login.php, it would say, a flaw in the customer login portal allowed us to access the entire customer database, posing a significant risk to data privacy and regulatory compliance. Actionable, prioritized findings. An average report is just a list of vulnerabilities sorted by a CVSS score. An excellent report groups findings into logical attack chains and provides a customized risk rating based on the client's specific environment. More importantly, the remediation steps are not just generic advice copied from the internet. They are specific, actionable, and prioritized. I would include code examples for developers, GPO settings for system admins, and architectural diagrams for network engineers. The narrative and positive reinforcement. An excellent report tells a story. It details the attack path from initial access to final objective, helping the client understand how vulnerabilities connect. Crucially, it also includes a section on what went well. I always make a point to highlight security controls that worked, teams that had a great security posture, or positive security practices I observed. This shows the engagement was a partnership, not just a critique, and it builds immense goodwill with the client's technical teams, making them more receptive to the negative findings.
A huge part of this role is creating documentation and presenting it. In your opinion, what separates an average penetration test report from a truly excellent one that provides maximum value to the customer?
That's a crucial part of the job, bridging the gap between the technical finding and the business impact. My approach is to listen, validate, and then demonstrate. First, I would actively listen to the developer's reasoning. I wouldn't interrupt. I'd say, "Thank you for that context. I understand your point about the compensating controls, and it's valuable information." This shows respect for their expertise and de-escalates any potential conflict. 2, I would then reframe the risk. I might say, from a defensive standpoint, I see how that control should work. However, from an attacker's perspective, we were able to bypass that control using X technique. The risk isn't just about the vulnerability in isolation. It's about the entire attack chain. 3, this is the most important step. If possible, I would offer to do a live, controlled demonstration. I'd say, to make sure we're on the same page, would it be helpful if I quickly showed you the exploit path we used? It would only take a few minutes and would clarify how we were able to chain this vulnerability with another misconfiguration to gain access to the customer database. Seeing is believing. A successful demo almost always ends the debate. 4, my goal isn't to win the argument, it's to accurately convey the risk so the business can make an informed decision. I'd end by saying, our ultimate goal is the same, to protect the organization. Let's work together to agree on the potential business impact, and then we can determine the right priority for a fix. By staying calm, respecting their knowledge, and focusing on a live demonstration of the business impact, you can almost always turn a disagreement into a collaborative problem-solving session.
That's a great approach. Final question. This field changes constantly. The job description mentions a natural thirst for knowledge. How do you stay current with the latest vulnerabilities, adversary TTPs, and exploitation techniques?
For me, continuous learning isn't just a requirement, it's a passion. I have a multi-pronged approach. I'm very active on platforms like Hack the Box and Try Hack Me. It's one thing to read about a vulnerability, but it's another to exploit it yourself in a lab environment. This keeps my practical skills sharp. I follow key security researchers on Twitter and Mastodon, which is often where new techniques break first. I also regularly read blogs from trusted sources like Mandiant, the Hacker News, and various security research teams. I dedicate time each week to more structured learning. Right now, I'm working through a course on Active Directory exploitation to deepen my knowledge there. I also listen to security podcasts like Darknet Diaries and Risky Business during my commute to stay up to date on industry news. I maintain a small home lab environment where I can safely test new tools, replicate vulnerabilities from recent CVEs, and understand how they work from both an offensive and defensive perspective. It's this combination of practical labs, community knowledge, and structured study that allows me to stay current and continually bring new techniques and a fresh perspective to my engagements.
Excellent. Thank you for your time today and for your detailed answers. We'll be in touch.
And that's a wrap on our mock interview. Did you see the pattern in those answers? First, every answer was structured. It wasn't just a brain dump of technical facts. Second, the candidate constantly connected technical details back to business risk and impact. Third, they emphasized collaboration and communication, not just their own technical skill. Use this as a template. Think about your own experience and how you can frame it using these same strategies. If you do, you'll be more than ready for your next big interview. If you found this helpful, hit that like button and subscribe for more content designed to boost your cybersecurity career. Let me know in the comments what role you want to see a mock interview for next. Thanks for watching.